there has been a new petition started and movement by, of all people, Ben Shapiro, to pardon Derek Chauvin, to petition President Donald Trump in the US to pardon Derek Chauvin. Now, I know that you all know this, but if you are watching this on the YouTube clip after and you've just woken up from your 10-year nap under a rock somewhere, Derek Chauvin was the man who supposedly murdered George Floyd, the civil rights and fentanyl icon of the US civil rights movement and the BLM movement back in 2020. He was convicted for it, sentenced to 21 years. It was this big thing. I don't know if you remember, but there were riots, cities were burned down, there was about $2 billion worth of property damage. And the fact of the matter is that if you watch the footage that was released of the body cam, it becomes very, very clear immediately that Derek Chauvin did not, in fact, murder George Floyd. We covered all of this at the time, but it's worth repeating for the sake of clarity in this segment, that in fact what happened, from what you can observe, is that George Floyd suffered a fatal fentanyl overdose through taking fentanyl mixed with methamphetamine.
I'm sure you have plenty of information to share with us about it, but I just want to say one thing, that let us remember how crazy it was. Oh, yeah. After what happened.
It's almost 5 years ago now. So
after those fiery but mostly peaceful protests.
Yeah, it's difficult in the same way that COVID and lockdowns were about 5 years ago now. It's kind of difficult to put yourself back into the mindset that you were in and into those circumstances. But it was crazy. A short 9-minute video of a guy saying that he couldn't breathe while somebody was supposedly choking him out by kneeling his knee on the back of his neck. Not how you choke people out. Also, if you were choking to death, you wouldn't be able to yell about how you couldn't breathe. Typically, all the noise that you'd be able to make is like that. So, very strange circumstances. People took it for granted that this was an obvious murder that they just witnessed pop up on their social media, and they took to the streets and started protesting.
Defund the police. Because that's how you're going to make people feel safer.
Defund the police. And the riots that came of all of that burned down $2 billion worth of property damage and led to circumstances like the ones that Kyle Rittenhouse found himself in.
And I would add the divide between politicians and common people. Because you remember that, was it Tim Walz who was governor of Minnesota at the time?
I think he must have been at the time.
He must have been. And he was essentially rewarded by allowing Minnesota to burn.
Yes. Well, there are a lot of political incentives governing all of this that we'll be able to see as we go on. But what you should do as well, watching this on YouTube, is buy Islander. It is neither fiery nor mostly peaceful. It is, in fact, entirely peaceful. It is harmonious. You will be at one in a state of zen with yourself when you read this magazine. It's beautifully illustrated. The articles are beautifully written, including contributions from Carl Benjamin, Nima Parvini, Marcus Follin, Morgoth's Review, Connor Tomlinson, and many more. And it's well worth a read. You can find it on the website for £14.99, and it is a limited run, so get it while you still can. And while you're on there, why don't you pick up a little bit of our new merch that we've got? We've got the new Islander 3 merch line, which includes things like the film stock, and we've got the Richard the Lionheart t-shirt. We've got some of the other Islander Sunset. We've got a wonderful range of merchandise for you right here. So pick yourself up something nice while you're on there, right? Anyway, back to it. So Ben Shapiro comes out with this video explaining why it is that Derek Chauvin should be pardoned, going over a little bit of the information that I've gone over already, and includes a link to this new website called pardonderek.com. And it's a petition that you can sign your first and last name, give your email, typical petition site, but also includes an open letter from Ben Shapiro and co-signers of this petition to Donald Trump. And it's actually quite a good roundup of the information surrounding the case. If you're unfamiliar with it, I don't actually know what Donald Trump knows of the circumstances surrounding the case, other than the fact that George Floyd was supposedly murdered by Derek Chauvin, right? So this might be good.
He may know him as Fent Man or something.
Maybe he does, or maybe he knows him as...
The Fent is strong in him.
Maybe he does think that Derek Chauvin was a man who murdered... I doubt that he's not informed of the situation, but still, it bears repeating. I'll just go through this because it's a nice summation. George Floyd was high on fentanyl. He had a significant pre-existing heart condition. He was saying he could not breathe before he was even out of the car. Derek Chauvin, for large segments of the widely circulated video of the encounter, had his knee on George Floyd's shoulder or back, not on his neck. This was confirmed by the autopsy, which showed no damage to George Floyd's trachea. There was no accusation at trial that Derek Chauvin targeted George Floyd for his race. That is also a big thing which surprised Callum when he was covering it at the time. They were expecting it to be an almost entirely race-based trial.
That's how it was presented.
That's certainly how it was presented by the media in 2020, but by the time you get to 2021, they've dropped that aspect of it entirely, and they're going with a more procedural police brutality, police failures kind of approach to their prosecution case against Derek Chauvin.
That's interesting, because they changed the language, most probably because they had to address people.
Because there was no evidence that Derek Chauvin was targeting him for his race, especially given that he was in a team of police officers who were doing the arrest. There weren't black police officers with him, but there was like an Asian police officer and things like that. So it was difficult to make the case that he was racist.
But also, it's difficult to make a case. It's different to make a case on TV on the one hand and on judges on the other.
Yeah, in a courtroom where you have to go through established procedural processes. But they carry on. Perhaps most significantly, there was a massive overt pressure on the jury to return a guilty verdict regardless of the evidence or any semblance of impartial deliberation. This pressure took the form of threats, coercion, and intimidation. The mayor of Minneapolis prejudged the outcome of the trial and immediately issued a large settlement to the Floyd family. Then President Biden, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, and others prejudged the outcome of the trial and took to national media to create pressure on the jury to go along with their preferred narrative. Under these circumstances, there was no opportunity for blind justice to work, and a man is now rotting in prison because of it. All of that is true, and he's not just rotting, as we'll get onto. He has been assaulted violently in prison for political reasons. And again, what they're saying there is absolutely right. Take your mind back to early 2021, the first half of 2021, when this original trial was going on. You were only a few months removed from the previous year's worst riots that burnt down cities, and then you see that there is this powder keg ready to erupt again. People who are supporters of Black Lives Matter are posting on social media about how if they do not see a guilty verdict, they will burn cities again, which we already knew that they had the year before and had basically been sanctioned in many Democrat-run cities and states by the authorities.
And the establishment essentially holds him as a political prisoner, but also communicated a profound message of profound weakness, because they did put him in prison, but the cities were burned regardless. So it's both immoral, unjust, but also they didn't achieve any kind of purpose.
Absolutely. And if people,
it's stupid as well.
Yeah, and if people want to say about a principled argument, then I mean there was no chance of any kind of fair trial. If you want to talk about the presumption of innocence before guilt, Derek Chauvin was judged guilty before he ever got near that courtroom.
Look at how all the deontological considerations are dropped when it comes to someone that the left wants to prosecute.
Well, that's the way that it had worked for a very, very long time. And for the people in the Rumble rants that we're getting here saying that the president can only pardon federal crimes, Chauvin pled guilty to some federal charges unrelated to Floyd. If he's pardoned, all that happens is he's taken from federal prison to a state prison. I will be getting onto that. I would assume that if there was any momentum generated by this, and if Donald Trump were to give some kind of official pardon, or at least a statement saying that Derek Chauvin was an innocent man, for instance, or had been wrongfully accused and convicted of crimes that he wasn't guilty of, then I would assume that would be able to build momentum for perhaps Americans in the audience can correct me, perhaps the Supreme Court or a state court overturning the charges that he was convicted guilty of. Because I would imagine that that's how you're able to get him out of prison. So perhaps the momentum can build to something positive for Chauvin, because he should not be rotting in a prison right now. And if you want more evidence of everything that's been laid out here and everything that I've been saying, you don't need to go any further than the full body cam footage of the George Floyd arrest that was released, let's see here, 4 years ago on the 10th of August 2020. Months after the controversy had already erupted and after cities had already been burned down. They waited almost, 3 months from the initial incident itself to release the police body cam footage, which shows exactly what Ben Shapiro and others are describing, which is that even before he was in the supposed chokehold, he was already in the car saying that he couldn't breathe. He was resisting arrest, he was screaming, he was trying to make a scene, and then in the course of being restrained, which was his own fault because he was resisting arrest, he managed to cause cardiopulmonary failure, by the sounds of it. Also because of the fact that he was on a load of drugs. Clearly he was high. At points in the video, I won't show it, points in the video you can see flecks of spit and white foam starting to come out of his mouth well before he's ever laid on the ground and has the knee applied to him. And it was suggested as part of the trial as well, the only reason that at that time Derek Chauvin and the others did not administer Narcan or other anti-overdosing drugs was because of the fact that, well, a mob had formed around them. They didn't know how to respond to the situation. You've got to make split-second decisions, and so they made the decision to get the ambulance there, get him into the ambulance, and get out of there as quickly as possible, because there was potentially a riot on their hands because of the mob that had formed around them. Very difficult position to find yourself in. I don't know what I would have done in that position. I don't know if you know what you would have done in that position either. But the thing is, if you go down here and look at the comments, you get a lot of people like this. After seeing this video, I'm never going to believe what the media says ever again, because prior to this being released, the only video that we had of the incident was the one that was initially spread on social media, which is obviously only a very, very small, select part of the overall incident. The video is, 9-10 minutes long? The actual full body cam footage of it is 30 minutes long. So just watch that. Then you can also go to the official autopsy report that was released, where it said things like there were no life-threatening injuries identified, and that he had 11 nanograms per milliliter, I assume that is, of fentanyl in his body, which was about double the lethal dose.
Okay.
That's about double. Now, I remember when this came up in the trial, the argument that the prosecution made was that George Floyd was so used to taking fentanyl, because he took so much of it, that his body had adapted and become basically immune to it.
Yes.
Like he had the tolerance of a horse to this stuff, was the argument that they made. But then you can also see other things.
Norfentanyl.
He also had
methamphetamine.
I think he also had
caffeine.
Yeah, caffeine. That must have been what did it. I think he also had cannabinoids in there, so he'd been smoking some cannabis as well. So there was a lot of drugs in his system. He already had heart problems, and I believe there was some kind of blockages to his heart valves as well. So this was just a perfect storm for this man, especially when he's being restrained. He's expelling a lot of energy to have some kind of incident, and it just happened that it happened when Derek Chauvin was trying to arrest him.
It's like a bodily powder keg.
Yeah.
It's about to explode.
Exactly. And this is very, very similar to the kind of trumped-up charges that were thrown against the police officers who attempted to arrest Rodney King back in the day. And I did a video on this based around a media analysis of American History X, where the Rodney King case comes up in a few of the scenes, and it led in a very similar way to riots, more centralized in Los Angeles. Obviously, you get things like the rooftop Koreans out of it, but the media also went out of their way to depict the police officers who were caught on camera beating Rodney King as evil racists who just did it for the sake of the fact that they'd arrested a black man, completely ignoring the fact that he had been driving drunk and high through residential areas, being chased by the police at 120 miles per hour for over an hour, and that when they eventually got him to pull over, he was resisting arrest, and actually the techniques that they were using were standard police procedure. When it got to trial, and this is a clip I love from this video, when it got to trial, the police officer who was involved in it, the main police officer who was involved in it, was asked, well, if you needed to restrain him because he was resisting, why didn't you put him in a chokehold? And he responds with, because chokeholds were associated with police brutality against black men.
But also,
they still rioted, and people died. Innocent people were pulled from vans and lorries and died. Sorry, carry on.
No, I just wanted to say, absolutely, you're absolutely correct. And I just wanted to say that you forgot to mention that for the left, there is zero personal responsibility for anything that anyone does that is bad, if you're a darling on the left. So all of what you're telling us right now, the methamphetamine, the fentanyl, all the presence of all these ingredients and substances, but also the established bad behavior, it's just a problem of structures in society. It's society's fault.
Of course. And it means that we have to be held hostage by these delusional, irresponsible,
by some people who, for some
people.
reason, are going to... We're going to draw a distinction, and it's not going to be their fault. It's everyone else's fault.
And because of incidents like Rodney King and the riots that erupted after that, George Floyd and the riots that erupted after that, this is not the kind of morality that you can hold a stable society together with. This always erupts into violence. And if you get the opportunity, if you subscribe to the website, this is a video I'm still very proud of. So please watch that if you get the chance. But obviously, with this petition, some people are calling out Ben Shapiro for what they're calling hypocrisy, which is immediately following the video being released of George Floyd's death. Ben Shapiro was suggesting that, well, he was outright saying that it was a bad police officer who destroyed George Floyd's rights, actually murdered him, but at the same time he was always saying that they shouldn't be going out rioting, looting, targeting business owners, etc., etc. I would say this is... I can accept that he would say this immediately following it when all we have is the video that was released to social media. We had very, very limited information at the time. And to be fair to him, he was still saying, listen, guys, rioting is not the answer to this. Now, since then, we've had a lot more information released. It's 5 years later. People can change their minds on this. I know some people don't like to be very charitable to Ben Shapiro. I'm not a huge fan of him, but defending the rights of an innocent man who's being held as a political prisoner is something that I can stand by him for. And the interesting thing with Shapiro as well is, obviously, given his connections, it's able to get to people like Elon Musk, who has also responded to this, saying that it's something to think about. Now, we'll see if this ends up going anywhere, if it's just another one of those things that Elon Musk posts on Twitter and then forgets about a week later, as he loves doing. But Elon Musk is very close to the president, and this kind of momentum could be built to try and get something positive done for Derek Chauvin. I could only hope. But in this article, there's extra information. So the Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison said in a statement that Trump's potential pardon, as was pointed out by one of our very generous Rumble ranters, wouldn't free Chauvin since he's still concurrently serving a state sentence where he's anticipated to be released on the 10th of December 2035. Again.
In 10 years.
Yes.
10.5 years.
10 years. 10 years. He was originally given a 21-year sentence, so I would assume that it would be half the sentence and then out on parole.
That's almost 3/4.
Oh, yeah,
and
true.
also 3/4 of a sentence after there has been evidence that the crime wasn't essentially...
I mean, the evidence came out during the trial, but obviously it was a kangaroo court, so he wasn't able to get his a real fair hearing on this. Carries on to say, last December, Chauvin's legal team has been granted permission to examine heart tissue and fluid samples taken from the victim's body in an attempt to challenge his conviction. In January of last year, Chauvin saw an appeal tossed surrounding the argument that pretrial publicity and ongoing civil unrest led to an unfair trial, which it absolutely did. His latest bid to have his conviction tossed cites ineffective assistance of counsel from original defense attorney Eric Nelson, whom he says failed to relay to him a Kansas forensic pathologist's theory that Chauvin did not cause Floyd's death. Given the significant nature of the criminal case that Chauvin was convicted of, and given that the discovery he seeks could support the pathologist's opinion of how Mr. Floyd died, the court finds that there is good cause to allow Chauvin to take the discovery. And it adds that Chauvin's defense team will now have the ability to procure evidence from histology slides and tissue samples taken from the victim's heart during his initial autopsy, the results of which were used to convict Chauvin and 3 others. And if further down in the article as well, it talks about the 2 autopsies that were conducted. There were 2, one that was commissioned by Floyd's family and one that was officially done as part of the trial, I believe. So it says the official cause of death was cardiopulmonary arrest caused by law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression. So in that one that I showed, where it was saying about all of the fentanyl that he had in his system, they still decided to conclude that Derek Chauvin's interference, restraining him, was the overall cause of death. Obviously, a politically motivated conclusion. A second autopsy, this one commissioned by Floyd's family, came to the same conclusion, citing asphyxia specifically as the cause of death.
That means that he couldn't breathe, the asphyxia. But I think we should go back to what you said before. If I touch you and you explode, yeah, it's not going to be my fault. But now, obviously,
I don't know. What have you got on the tip of your finger?
We're not talking about a case of this sort. When you're a police officer who is expected to try and use force to restrain people who are not cooperating, there are going to be some actions you're allowed to do and you're expected to do. Now, if as a result of these actions, someone with a lot of other issues ends up dead, it doesn't seem to me to be that it's your fault, because you did exactly what your job was supposed to be, and it wasn't something that was out of line.
No, I agree. And the interesting thing about these 2 autopsies is they both say, well, yeah, actually, he didn't choke to death. It was cardiopulmonary arrest caused by the law enforcement. But at the same time, one says neck compression, the other says asphyxia specifically as the cause of death. So even these 2 autopsies come to slightly different conclusions. And in the one that was commissioned by Floyd's family, it ruled out the possibility that underlying medical problems contributed to Floyd's passing, citing how Floyd was able to speak under the pressure of Chauvin's knee. So he can't have had a heart problem that was set off terribly by the drugs and the being put under restraint, because he can speak under the pressure of the knee, but at the same time is being choked to death by that same knee, but can speak.
The issue is that when they're citing asphyxia as the cause of death, they are omitting the question of what causes asphyxia. It's definitely the case that restraint added to the whole thing, but it wasn't the only thing, as the autopsy shows.
Yes, and as the video shows, that he was already high as a kite and already shouting, screaming that he couldn't breathe before he was put under any restraint. And again, this is stuff that was interestingly known at the time. The medical examiner's autopsy, I think that's the original one, the second one was the one commissioned by Floyd's family, said that... and this came out in June of 2020, very soon after the initial incident. They said that his cause of death was cardiopulmonary arrest, complicating law enforcement subdual, restraint, and neck compression. That conclusion, due to death due to heart failure, differs from the one reached by an independent examiner hired by the Floyd family. The medical examiner's report does not mention asphyxiation. However, according to prosecutors in charging documents filed, early results revealed no physical findings that support a diagnosis of traumatic asphyxia or strangulation. Okay, so what was it then? One autopsy says that it wasn't anything to do with asphyxiation. The other one says it was something to... The one that was commissioned by his family says that it was asphyxiation. So even at the time, at the beginning of June, a few days after the incident, already you're getting conflicting reports, but the riots were allowed to happen anyway. The misinformation about what killed him was already allowed to spread, and they also mentioned that he had heart disease, hypertension, and sickle cell trait. Again, powder keg waiting to go off. And for that, what does Derek Chauvin get? He gets years in prison, where he's already been stabbed 22 times by some Mexican mafioso who did it specifically as a symbolic connection to the Black Lives Matter movement. Politically motivated stabbing by a criminal for a man who did nothing wrong other than his job on that day when it happened. Has this got to Donald Trump? Well, somebody asked Donald Trump whether he's going to pardon Derek Chauvin. Again, not that that would actually get him out of prison, but still, it might set off a chain of events. What did Donald Trump have to say about the matter?
Your allies are calling on you to pardon Derek Chauvin. Are you considering pardoning Derek Chauvin?
No, I haven't even heard about it. No.
Okay, so it's not really got to him yet, and he doesn't really seem to have it on his high on his list of priorities. You also get at the same time people like this supposed conservative, American conservative Rob Smith saying that pardoning Derek Chauvin is a terrible idea because is there a principled reason for this? Or is it for purely pragmatic or maybe even personal reasons? He says it does nothing for Trump's agenda. Yes, it does. Freeing or trying to free an innocent man is always a good thing. And it would cause racial strife in America. It's an idea that's so toxic and destructive. I don't know what Ben Shapiro is thinking. Well, he's thinking an innocent man is in prison, and on principle, that is wrong. He is a political prisoner held hostage by the previous regime, and America as a whole is being held hostage by these kinds of people, being allowed to get away with it. Racial strife means that you are being held hostage by insane activists and populations who are eager to burn down their own neighborhoods the second that some kind of hint of police brutality is thrown at them on social media. You cannot have a society like this, and this is not a principled position to take. And I can only finish this segment off by saying that whether or not Donald Trump pardoning him would get the justice that he needs, would get him out of prison, whatever needs to happen to get him out of prison needs to happen, because he should not have been there in the first place.
Islander issue 3 is now available to purchase from shop.lotus.com and is the next step in the story that we are telling with this magazine. For this issue, we have collected piercing and esoteric essays from the finest right-wing minds on the theme of our civilizational winter. Each of our authors is an expert in bringing forth the most important hidden revelations from the lowest reaches of the soul, and it has all been beautifully rendered in a medievalist revivalist aesthetic. For this issue, I commissioned a new translation of the ancient Anglo-Saxon poem, The Wanderer, and have written a companion essay exploring how it is a reflection of our modern experience. I personally feel that this is the most important thing I've ever written, so I will be looking forward to your feedback on it. We have resolved our distribution issues, with the magazines being printed in advance of the orders, so we can guarantee that you will receive your copy very soon after ordering it, and you will also receive emailed updates so you can see exactly where it is. Hopefully, issue 3 can provide you with the space and context to engage in deep reflection about the nature of our circumstances, to discover hidden truths about yourself and find the resolve to make it through our spiritual exile.